Alright. All right. We're
We are
live.
live. Miss Bartell, I just want to say I'm sorry my computer doesn't have a webcam, but
Oh
I hope you can
man.
hear me.
And also, if you see my screen freeze, oh god, here we go with that stupid thingy. Okay. Okay. All right.
It's
I have
sorry.
notes. I have notes here. That's why. They're on my little handy dandy tab. So where am I? Where are y'all? I think y'all are here. Yeah, okay. All right, you can stop that now. All right. So guys, the
We
great
should probably obviously start with the question that she put on Classroom,
yeah.
which is about the ending of chapter 1 and how it sets the mood.
Mhm.
Um, to give a little bit of a basis, I feel like it gives a decent amount of imagery. Like it compares often throughout it a a comparison to darkness and light, and I feel like that might be some form of symbolism maybe to society. I don't know if it sounds like a stretch, but like I feel like during the time and during like this time period, a lot of times people would try like drinking and having parties to kind of forget like the tragedies of World War I, which would kind of be like darkness. And like it did say in later chapters that Gatsby and the main character are World War veterans. And at one point, for some reason, Gatsby was shaking. Like, was it in page 20 or 21? He started looking like he was shaking.
Yes,
So that
21. It
might
was like
be,
this where he was
so
trembling.
that might have been like some form of comparison to the darkness and light.
Could that be a sign of PTSD?
I was actually kind of thinking that when I was reading it too, that it could have been potentially a sign of PTSD.
Yeah, like the loudness and like everybody
Mhm.
just being everywhere and just making all this like commotion, like that could like be triggering to him. But although like I don't know why it would only be like triggering to him and not Nick,
No,
since they're both
this was like during the moment where it was like he was just looking outside his yard and he saw a figure and he realized that this figure was Gatsby, and
mm-hmm,
Gatsby was kind of just like looking down at his little pond or something, some water,
mm-hmm.
and that's when he started trembling. Like it could be a potential foreshadowing because like when I read that I was like, oh my gosh, why is he trembling? But it could also, I also kind of connected it to maybe PTSD, but
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't really like anything. Like he thought that he was gonna try and call to him. Like it says at the bottom, I decided to call to him, but then he decided, like, he changed his mind and he said, but I didn't call to him because he gave the sudden it's intimidate. Like he gave the idea that he wanted to be alone, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was PTSD. I felt like the whole like setup, the paragraph before that one paragraph when he sees him was like a setup, and it tried to make you feel like very like at peace and very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt like that lonely feeling could connect to why he was trembling at the at the dark water in a curious way. Like I felt like maybe that's why I didn't think it was PTSD per se, because there wasn't a party going on at
Mhm.
this time.
That's true.
Do you think that there's any connection between the darkness and the loneliness? Because I noticed later on in chapter 3, when he starts talking about his personal life, he says something along the lines of when it's dark out, he starts to feel more lonely, and I kind of connected it back to this moment in time right here when it was dark out and both of those two men were by themselves. So do you think there's any connection between those two ideas?
I mean, it seems like it because when I think of honestly, when I think of darkness, I think of loneliness. I feel like they kind of correspond with each other, and it's like I don't know, like I'm trying to form it into words and sound scholarly, but it's not working. Like, see, I don't know. I feel like when he gets to be like alone, like once the nighttime hits, like once he starts to become alone, like that's when he finds like what am I trying to say? Like where he can really reflect on himself rather than trying to like appease or like uh please other people with like his riches and stuff, which kind of makes me feel like he's not really happy with his riches, if that makes any sense. Like, because some people, when they're like when they have like an extreme amount of wealth, they're not always happy.
Mhm.
But it's like they try to put on this facade for other people to make it seem as if like being wealthy is the way to go. But in reality, like when he's isolated from these other people, he actually feels like really lonely, like because they don't want to be around him. Does that make sense? Like you get what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Well, that was actually one of my points for syntax for Ms. Bartelo's question. The last line that says, "When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness." I didn't realize that in the paragraph before that, he was setting up like a setting that wasn't quiet, that had like frogs like croaking and like birds were like flying in the trees. And I felt like this last line kind of symbolized both Gatsby and Nick's life, how they both like felt very alone, even though they had all this going around them. Like Gatsby had his like riches and his parties, but he was still going out into his backyard at night and like trembling at the lake for some reason. And Nick, even though he was a Yale graduate and people were saying, "Oh, you were engaged to this girl," and now he's with like Jordan and like he's hanging out with all these people, he still is very alone. And you can see that when he like is by himself at night, comparing himself to the darkness.
Yeah.
Oh, you bring up a good point, because I feel like just comparing the two like that creates like kind of like a doubles kind of rule with Gatsby and Nick. You get what I'm saying here? Because like both of them seem to have such a really, like both of them have the thing in common of they seem to have such a interesting life on the front, like parties, rich, oh yeah, and on the inside they're still like they went to World War, they served in the World War, and they suffer from a lot of loneliness and darkness quite often. And I also feel like that double also, I'm sorry to bring this up again, still kind of ties more back to the times of like the whole World War One idea of everybody partying to forget like the trauma of World War One, you know?
So if you think like it's the rule of doubles, do you think one of them is going to turn out like in a negative sense? Like one of them is going to turn out like an antagonist and the other one's going to turn out in a protagonist way?
I feel like it's still a little too early to determine that. Based on the way both of them are acting, I can't really determine that, because like Nick doesn't necessarily serve any particular, he doesn't have any personality traits that stick out. He kind of acts like that fly on the wall in a sense. Like he's there and people talk to him, but he doesn't really control events. He lets events around him dictate the way he acts. Like for example, at that one party with him, Tom, and Tom's like what's her name, Myrtle, and the Mickeys, like he really didn't like what was happening there, but at the same time he just couldn't find it in himself to leave. So I feel like so I don't think I could see that happening. The most I can really see like his admiration to Gatsby, really, because even though we're only 3 chapters in, you could tell that he has a deep admiration for Gatsby and his mysterious presence.
I don't know. I feel like, to be honest, I feel like they could both be a protagonist, because Nick honestly stood out to me. Like his characteristics, like he just seems different from the rest. And also with Gatsby, like you said, like he's mysterious and everything. So I feel like there's a potential for them to both be the protagonists. Like, I don't know, like I know, like you said, like there's not really enough information to determine that, but from the characteristics of each character that I got personally, I feel like there's a potential for them.
I felt like
you could continue, Emily.
I felt like they both had like very like strong protagonist qualities. Like I guess cheating on your wife would be one of them. Like, well, not cheating on your wife would be one of them. I also like they're both very friendly to people around them. I figured those were both like protagonist qualities, but they both had like a hint of antagonist qualities. So at the end when he's talking about Jordan and like why he remembered her because she cheated in a tennis tournament, and he was talking about how, oh, that's unforgivable. Like she's not honest. And then as he's like continuing to like think this out, he's like, well, I can't blame her because she's a girl. And I felt like that was very like sexist and a very like antagonist quality. And then Gatsby, there were like rumors that like he didn't get his fortune in a legal way, and that could also be an antagonist quality. So I like they have like their characters are set up to be either one, and right now I can't really tell which way either one is going to go, but like they could be set up to like have that unexpected like twist, I guess you could say.
Like it could be an unexpected turn for the better or for the worse. He probably set that up like intentionally so we couldn't figure it out because like I don't know really how to word it. I mean that's kind of like how it is in the real world, really. Not a lot of people get their success based on good terms, so
yeah. Let's see. Oh, I was gonna say something. Oh, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say something about Nick.
do you want to go more into Nick and his characterization?
Yeah. So when I was reading the first 3 chapters, I noticed that Nick definitely stood out from the rest of them. Like, you know how basically like the wealthy people acted versus like how he acted. He seemed very reserved and not as like materialistic, I should say. Like, I don't know, I felt like he was more happy just like living life rather than like focusing on money and just like expensive things and like going to parties and stuff like that. And I was actually going to mention something about the wealthy people in this scenario. Like, for some reason, they just seemed very careless. Like, they really did not care about anything really because of their like financial standpoint. They felt like they could just do whatever and just obtain superiority just because of their wealth. And certain actions that happened kind of prove that. Like, for example, the car accident. I feel like that could one that could foreshadow something, and two, it just shows how careless people could really be because it's just like, oh, I have money, I can pay for it. Like it doesn't matter. Like literally, I could pay my way out of anything. Like I don't know, they just all seem very like stuck up and just try to try to obtain superiority just because of their wealth. Whereas like Nick, he's just kind of there, to be honest. Like he's just not like them. Like he just seems very more to himself, like doesn't really like to do the things that they do, if that makes any sort of sense.
Well, to tie into the whole rich people kind of acting a little stuck up, I think that's highly reflected in the character Tom. Especially in that one scene where he's like, "Did you read that book called what was it, The Rise of the Colored Empires?" That's I think what he was like. He's like, "Did you read that? It's a really good book.
Oh
You
my
should
god,
read
that.
And he has this attitude of how, oh my gosh, colored people are catching up quick. We better destroy them before it's too late, essentially. So I feel like that ideal of Tom's characterization can tie into your idea of rich people acting like they're all superior. And you were talking about how Nick as a character kind of stuck out to you. On the contrary, to me, he felt like he didn't stick out to me at all, honestly.
Really?
It kind of just felt like I was watching what was happening through, I don't know, like a camera lens of Nick's eyes, if you get what I'm saying. It doesn't really, Nick didn't necessarily show a lot of emotion or anything like that. He wasn't going out and doing things out of his own ambitions. He was kind of just being dragged along around with what others were doing. And he was kind of just being dragged along by the story and what was happening around him. And I feel like that's part of a reason maybe why it's named Great Gatsby rather than like anything around Nick, because the story is probably going to center more on Gatsby based on the way that Fitzgerald kind of set up Nick's writing, because it didn't seem like Nick's the main character, but it doesn't seem centered around Nick, if you get what I mean, based on the way he writes it. Like the style and way the Fitzgerald kind of writes this almost makes it seem like Nick is just kind of like carrying a camera of like, oh, this is what's happening, and these are what these people are like, and I don't know much about Gatsby, and I want to figure out more about him. You know?
I would have to say that your arguments for why he didn't stick out is the arguments that I had for why he did stick out. You had all these like eccentric and like very like, this is what this person is like. Here are some examples of why. Like Tom, he's very like stuck up. There were some examples of it. He was cheating on his wife. Like he was very like racist. Like it was just like all these like things. I felt like he had Nick be so like, I guess, bland to be like a foil character to everyone else, to like kind of like emphasize like how this person acts compared to how I guess a normal person would act in this situation. Like someone who wasn't always surrounded like by money, who went out and experienced the real world. I guess like his experience in the war, I would say, is experience in the real world. It's kind of like a realization when you go through that. So yeah.
I feel like the parties kind of symbolize something too. Like the parties actually symbolize the American dream, because like it's full of luxurious and like expensive things and all this like alcohol and money and drugs and fancy people, or not drugs. Why did I say drugs?
Oh no, Courtney.
But like, yeah, like a bunch of like luxurious things, and like this is kind of ties into like the setting, not the setting, the time period, which is like the Roaring 20s. Like this is kind of like the lifestyle that they lived. So I feel like that's why the author chose that time period rather than like the 80s. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I felt like he chose that to make a statement about the times per se. Like when you're researching the author, it's just these certain things stick out, and it makes you think that, oh, he wrote the book in like such a way like, oh, these people are going out to parties, they're having a good time, they're like really rich, but like they're also horrible people at the same time. They don't care about anything, they don't care about anyone. I felt like he did that to make a statement about how like the 20s actually were, instead of how how everyone thought the 20s was.
Yeah. So do y'all want to move on to a different character? Or do you want to still talk about Nick, Gatsby, anybody else?
Do you think Tom has any particular significance or any symbol throughout the story? I don't know. I feel like even though this seems a little minor, I almost felt like his big physique was kind of like a representation of like his inflated ego.
Yeah.
Because he had such a big ego, and that's kind of like how a lot of people that were rich were. And I feel like his physical body and the way he kind of just abused everyone around him was just a representation of that kind of ego, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Do we want to talk about Tom and Daisy's relationship at all? Is there anything that sticks out to you guys about that? Like, I felt like
explain it to me again. Like, it was kind of confusing when I was reading it, to be quite honest. There was like a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, like, here he was, like, here Daisy was, Daisy's Nick's cousin, and she's married to Tom, and Tom is cheating on Daisy with Myrtle, and both Myrtle and Tom hate their spouses. And I feel like there's a clear contrast between Myrtle's spouse, Wilson, and Tom. Let me see if I can find the pages real quick.
Oh, and Daisy has a baby. I felt like that was mentioned, but that wasn't like in the book. It wasn't very like heavily brought out. Yeah, and
I almost had to keep on reminding myself that they had a child. I kept on wondering like why they kind of just like shoved the child like to the side.
My apologies. computer's dying, and I'm trying to find my charger.
That's okay.
Found it. Continue. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to look for the pages right now. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to go like what I thought their relationship was?
Please.
So
Yeah.
just like he tried to make a statement about the Roaring Twenties, I thought he was trying to make a statement about like how marriage was for wealthier people. I don't know if it was for poor, like I'm just assuming it's for wealthier people, but like how no one really liked the person they were with. Well, I guess you could say it was with poorer people too, because Myrtle and Wilson didn't like each other either. Well, Wilson liked Myrtle, but Myrtle was like infatuated with like Tom's wealth and like his power, and like ignored the way he actually treated her. I felt like those two relationships with Tom symbolized what was like was Fitzgerald's way of saying this is how relationships were actually during the 1920s, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of people out there that kind of just like, you know, use other people for their money and their status. And Myrtle didn't really seem interested in like Wilson's personality, because Wilson seemed like he seemed kind of bland, but at the same time he was much more nice. And like here Tom was just like treating him like freaking idiot and was like, oh, you know, and then he just like kind of dragged Myrtle out, like even without like just asking. He was just like, come on, let's go. And like Wilson was kind of just left there.
Yeah.
And I think to tie into the times, like, because the two, they both, Tom and Myrtle, hated being with the spouses that they were married to, but they had to go out and be in this affair in secrecy in a decent amount of the times. And I feel like that's kind of a reflection of the times, because like now getting a divorce is like so much more common then. Like I feel like if they were to get a divorce then, they realize how much it would kind of destroy their reputations. So that's why they would probably have to continue going out and being with their partner in secrecy.
I don't know, that for some reason that kind of reminds me of what. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No, it's fine.
Like, I don't know, this might be irrelevant, but it kind of reminds me of what Nathan was saying in his presentation, like that whole diagram. Y'all know what I'm talking about?
The love one?
Oh yeah, that little diagram.
Like for some reason, like that just kind of sparked my mind, like how certain people, like how relationships are, like in the, what was it, passion, intimacy, and
commitment.
Yeah, commitment. I feel like it was just what was the one where it was just commitment?
That was like marriages where like they didn't love each other. Thank you.
But like they were still kind of like bound to it because they married each other.
I feel like that's what kind of applies there. I don't know why I thought of that. Like I just
no, but I see the connection and I agree with that, quite frankly.
Yeah. Do you think other relationships will symbolize like unhealthy relationships?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like Jordan and Nick's relationship, maybe?
See, I don't know with that, because like I said before, like we don't really know what's going on. Like this is kind of just an introduction of characters. So it's kind of like you never know what's really going to happen in the near future. So I feel like when we read like chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, that's when we'll really get an understanding of their relationship. But I mean, I could see that happening, to be honest. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
I wouldn't doubt the possibility, but like Courtney said, I can't really be sure. Do we have anything else that we want to say on this topic?
I just want to ask how, like, you know how West Egg and East Egg are separated because East Egg is old money and West Egg is like new money, like people who just got wealthy and weren't from wealthy families. Do you think that affected the characters at all?
I feel like it could, to be honest, like determine their superiority amongst others. I feel like superiority does play a huge factor in this book overall, like wealth and superiority. Like the more wealth you have, the more superior you are amongst other people, which can probably change or shift people's attitudes with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I thought oh my god, I thought it really affected Tom because he was from he was from East Egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Like when we meet him in the book, he's in East Egg with Daisy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt like that old money kind of like ideas, like I guess today, like a wealthy, like conservative. That's what I compared him to, like someone who is from like a very traditional family because they're from old money, compared to someone who just came from new money who wasn't wealthy before, so they can have like these like new like liberal ideas. That's what I compared him to. I thought that since he came from old money, that he thought that cheating on his wife would be okay because he had money to like kind of flaunt at everyone else. Like if someone brought it up, he would like kind of like flex his power, I guess. Like I have this money over you influence.
He kind of did flex his power to Myrtle in a sense too, because he was like, "You better not mention Daisy. You're not allowed to mention Daisy." And then here she is, like, "I'll say it all I want." And then all of a sudden, he breaks her nose.
Right. That's what he's all God. I said,
so, do you think because of his background? Sorry, I just dropped my phone. Like, it gives him a more sense of entitlement then. Like he feels much more entitled.
Wait, can you repeat your question? Like I'm trying to understand.
Like because Emily was talking about Tom and old money and whatnot. So with the whole old money sense, like coming with a background like that, do you think that gives him like a sense of like entitlement, basically, because of that?
I would say yeah, because when Nick meets Tom, I guess for the first time in the book, Tom is wearing a horseback riding outfit, which I thought symbolized like wealth. And like when you meet someone, they're usually not wearing a horseback riding outfit unless they think they're better than you. That's just my thought process. If I met someone and they were like, unless they just came from like doing that like 2 seconds ago, it's very much like a power move.
Yeah.
Like, I have this much wealth. I can do this. What can you do? Kind of.
Yeah, I agree. Is there any other character you want to talk about?
I was actually, before we get into like any more characters, I kind of wanted to like Emily brought it up a little bit about East Egg and West Egg. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the setting of the two, because like in between the two, there's like a really empty valley in between them. Do you think that valley, like the emptiness, like and ashes kind of like symbolize anything? Because here they are, like the East Egg and the West Egg, they're like all glorious, and I feel like they represent like what everybody wants to see on the surface, all of the happiness and the wealth. And then this valley in between them, that's like the things that nobody wants to see, like the desolation and all of that stuff, and all of the stuff that everybody wants to hide. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like it kind of represents like fantasy versus reality kind of dealio. Like they want to believe that everything's okay because like they have so much money, but money can only get you so far. And it's like without that, they have that empty field. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you get what I'm trying to say? Something.
Yeah, like that empty field like represents and is a symbolization of what they're lacking.
Yeah.
So I thought it was on the way to New York. I thought they were going to New York and like they had to go through this kind of, didn't he say it was like a valley of ashes?
Yeah, it was exactly that, a valley of ashes.
Yeah, so I thought that him going to New York through this valley of ashes kind of like symbolized industrialization. Like Bodner came into my head. He was like, "This is what like the time of industrialization," and I was like, "Oh my god!"
No. This is like, not AP World History.
So like, I thought that it kind of symbolized how industrialization was like leading to New York, like how New York was mainly like manufacturing stuff. Well, not New York.
Yeah.
This would have been the area that was manufacturing stuff. So like kind of like how industrialization led to greater economy in New York, but like it left all this like desolation. Like there were like poor people who lived in like horrible conditions, and it just wasn't like good for them. It was only good for the people making profit from it.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
this was like a time where this kind of like this industrialization was thriving, and New York was certainly one of those places where it was happening. So I think that comparison just brings even more light to it, Emily.
Yeah.
So,
Do we have any?
sorry.
Continue.
So, I just wanted to bring this up about Daisy. You remember how, what was it? It was from A Tale of Two Cities. It was the blonde character who was kind of like the angel, like
I think her name was Lucy.
Lucy. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
Daisy is going to be a Lucy-like character?
I don't.
Why?
Yeah.
She doesn't have any like appeal. Like Lucy almost kind of seemed like innocent. Daisy wasn't like that as a character. She more or less just simply acted like it on the surface. Like that one conversation that she was having with Nick once Tom left the room, she was acting all dumb and pretty and sweet when Tom was there, but once Tom left, you could see that she was actually a lot smarter than she acted on the surface. And in fact, she actually kind of hates herself for it. Like she was saying, oh my gosh, I totally forget what page it was on, but she was talking about how basically the whole gist of it was ignorance is bliss. Like she was kind of mad at herself for being smart, and she wants to be like she doesn't want to be smart. Like right here she says, you see, I think everything's terrible anyhow. And everybody thinks so, the most advanced people, and I know. I've been everywhere and I've seen everything and I've done everything. And she's like being mad at herself for being sophisticated. So I don't think she can be a in quote godlike figure if she sees such faulty and difficulty in herself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's funny that you brought that up, Emily, that you were saying how she kind of reminded you of Lucy, because I just looked up her name real quick, and what Daisy's actually symbolized is innocence. So I don't know, like I said before, like this is introduction of characters, so maybe she could actually be innocent later on in the story. But it also words. But it could also play an ironic factor, given that the fact that her name means innocence, but in reality, she's actually not.
Yeah, when Sarah was talking about her conversation with Nick, it reminded me of when she was talking about her baby girl and when she found out it was a girl. And she said, all I can hope, she'll be a fool. The best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. And it just like, I remember that line and it made me realize like how much she knew about like gender equality and like how much she knew like how much like I guess a girl could do during this time.
Yeah, and it really wasn't a lot that a woman could do.
Yeah.
Because of the stereotypes that were set on them.
I totally think that since like you said what Daisy means innocence, I was immediately like irony in the back of my head.
Yeah,
I totally
like,
think that was like an irony moment.
Yeah.
And why do you think that Fitzgerald chose for the baby, even though this doesn't really seem to be like, I don't know how big this plays in a story. Why do you think that Fitzgerald wrote her baby to be a girl rather than a boy? To make the comparison and further characterize Daisy in that sense?
I'm trying to like let your questions sink in, because like I get what you're trying to ask, but I'm just trying to like
Yeah.
I felt like it was like just for that moment with the conversation between Daisy and Nick to like help the readers understand how smart she was about the world she lived in. She wasn't like completely innocent. She wasn't completely ignorant about what was going on and like what the world would let her do in a sense. Like she knew like if the baby was born a boy, we wouldn't have that moment with Nick and Daisy. We would have just had like, oh, it was a baby boy, like he'll do like great things, like whatever. But like having a baby girl and just that realization that she probably won't be able to do the things like a man will do or things that like she'll want to do. It was like that realization moment I think we needed to have to realize what kind of character Daisy would be.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, so I think we're coming a little bit closer to the end of this, but I feel like one thing I kind of want to touch on is Gatsby himself before we come to the closing. Like the
So this
title
is like our
is
closing topic.
yeah. Like the title here is The Great Gatsby, so when you see the title, you're immediately thinking like, "Oh, who's Gatsby? What's a Gatsby?" If you don't know that Gatsby's a person. And there's such a foreshadowing and mysterious presence to Gatsby. Like anytime Nick is brought, like somebody brings up Gatsby in a conversation with Nick, and they're like, "Oh, have you ever heard of the Gatsby?" Why do you think that he's written in such a way? Why is he so mysterious?
That's a good question. I feel like it's because it's like he's the same as other people, but he's really not in a way. Like it's just something that he's holding back. Like it's just this like secret. Like he's just not the same as other people. Like the way he holds himself and like how he acts when he's alone versus other people. Like he's kind of like a mix of like a mix of everybody.
A mix of everybody. Do you think that he's any form of symbol of the way people were during the time?
Gatsby or Nick?
Gatsby.
A little bit, but not as severe.
I don't think so. I think that we have seen what the people of that time act like through his party guest and like through Tom. Felt like we like know like they're very like snobbish and they're very like they're not the protagonist of the story. And like the argument that we had earlier, like whether or not like Gatsby or Nick would be the protagonist, I felt like that showed like how different Gatsby was from the rest of the crowd. Like he stood out because he had this mysterious like sense to him.
Not gonna lie, like at least half of what you were saying got cut off by the lag.
Oh,
So
so like what I like like a gist of what I said was like the argument we had earlier about like whether Gatsby or Nick was the protagonist and like the character traits that kind of showed that. I felt like that argument kind of proved why Gatsby was different from the rest of the people there. Like we know how the rest of the people act because like because of like the characters at the party and because we met Tom and like Wilson and Myrtle. I felt like that kind of like helps set the difference between Gatsby and the rest of the world.
Yeah. Do you think he has the potential to be a dynamic character, or do you think he'll remain like static?
I felt like the mystery around him sets him up to be a dynamic character. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, these guys want to call it a night. I feel like we've taken up a lot of Bartella's time.
Yeah, yes. I think we're good. I think.
Good discussion, guys.
Yay, buddies.
All right, so should I just click stop broadcast? Is that what we do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Great. Bye, Bartella.